Hi everyone, welcome to Extra Credit, and today is our fourth episode on the history of Rome. So last time we saw that in the early days of the Roman Republic, the Romans did a whole lot of conquering in the Italian peninsula using a version of the good cop, bad cop method. You also may remember that I took some time to poke fun at the idea of grade 8 students not being able to say the word peninsula properly. But really, I probably shouldn't talk because I'm technically a millennial and I still actually don't know if it's Ariana Grande or Ariana Grande. And I really don't want you to tell me because I love your looks of horror when I get it wrong. So last time we saw them in 275 BC, the Romans had taken over the entire Italian peninsula using a combination of charm, persuasion, and sharp metal objects, which meant that they were now in a position to become the dominant power in the entire Mediterranean world. There was only one thing that stood in their way, and that was an even more powerful ancient empire called Carthage, based in North Africa. Now, as we saw last week, the Romans didn't set out at the start with a master plan to take over the whole world, but it was their wars with Carthage that first brought this idea into their heads. So between 264 and 146 BC, the Romans fought a series of 3 wars with the Empire of Carthage that we call the Punic Wars. And in answer to your question, yes, there's a reason they're called the Punic Wars, and no, it's actually not that interesting. But the wars themselves were absolutely fascinating, and because they played such a key role in Roman and therefore world history, it's worth taking a look at what caused them and what happened as a result of them. Also, not to give too many spoilers here, but the fact that this series is about the history of Rome and not the history of Carthage should probably give you a clue as to who ends up winning. So the First Punic War was fought for control of the island of Sicily, aka that weirdly shaped football being kicked by the Italian boot. Basically what happened was in 264 BC there were 2 cities on Sicily that got into a fight with each other, which wouldn't really have been a big deal in itself, except for the fact that one of those cities was friends with Carthage and the other city was friends with, you guessed it, Rome. So what should have been a pretty small conflict ended up blowing up into something way bigger, with Carthage and Rome fighting it out for control of the entire island. Now, because so much of this war took place on water, the Romans had to perform the impressive feat of building an entire navy from scratch. But what was even more impressive was the fact that they had to rebuild their navy not once, not twice, but 3 times after it was destroyed by storms. Now, the Romans were pretty religious, so it kind of makes you wonder if Neptune was trying to send them a message. But eventually the Romans were victorious and ended up taking over all of Sicily, which meant that the Carthaginians had to go find another sandbox to play in. That sandbox ended up being Spain, where in 219 BC the famous Carthaginian general Hannibal really annoyed the Romans when he attacked one of their allied cities called Saguntum. This started the Second Punic War, which is by far the most famous of the 3, mainly because what Hannibal did next completely took everybody by surprise, including the Romans. You see, rather than playing tag with the Romans in Spain, Hannibal decided to attempt one of the most ambitious, i.e. insane, military feats of all time by bringing his entire army of 90,000 guys over the mountain range called the Alps into Italy itself to bring the fight directly to the Romans. But lucky for him, Hannibal had a secret weapon up his sleeve, giant mumikil that he borrowed from the Herodrum in Middle... Wait, they were still just regular elephants? Come on, enemies of Rome, there's a reason you guys keep on losing. Okay, so it turns out that bringing elephants over the Alps wasn't really the best idea because apparently they're not very well suited for mountain climbing and most of them died along the way. But the crazy thing is that when Hannibal finally did make it down into Italy, he ended up handing the Romans their most devastating defeat of all time. This was at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, where despite being outnumbered 2-1, Hannibal managed to surround the entire Roman army and wipe out 45,000 Roman and allied troops. Understandably, this military defeat pretty much scarred the Romans for life and led them to make all kinds of changes to their tactics and organization. But one thing we saw last time that the Romans had, which others didn't, was an almost endless supply of manpower from their network of Italian allies. So in typical Roman fashion, they basically raised another massive army and then took a leaf out of Hannibal's book by invading North Africa itself to bring the fight to Hannibal on his own turf. This all climaxed in 202 BC with a showdown between Hannibal and the famous Roman general Publius Scipio at the plain of Zama, which is pretty near to Carthage itself in North Africa. At Zama, Scipio made up for the disaster at Cannae by crushing Hannibal's forces, thereby earning himself the name Scipio Africanus, ending the Second Punic War, and becoming one of the most revered figures in all of Roman history. But more importantly, inspiring this awesome scene from Gladiator. So after this, the Romans were feeling pretty confident, but there was one small thing about Carthage that really bugged them, namely the fact that it still existed. So in 149 BC, after extensive debate, the Roman Senate voted to launch a third Punic War and destroy Carthage once and for all. This was at least partly influenced by a really irritating Roman senator named Cato the Elder, who ended literally every speech on any topic with the words, "Furthermore, Carthage must be destroyed." And the other senators were like, "Okay, we get it. If we do it, will you just zip it already?" And he was like, "Sure, yeah, great." And Carthage must be destroyed. So in 146 BC, after a week of horrific street fighting, the final battle in Carthage ended, with the Romans putting the last nail in the coffin of their old enemy. Once the smoke had cleared, Carthage's original population of around 1 million people had been reduced to about 50,000 who were sold as slaves, and the city itself was comprehensively destroyed and erased from the map. After over a century of conflict, Rome was the only one left standing. Now, like all history, the Punic Wars are fascinating in and of themselves, but what matters most for our purposes today is the effect that they had on the rest of Roman history. The first is the most obvious, and that is that without Carthage around anymore, Rome was now the undisputed master of the entire Mediterranean world and pretty much could have a free hand doing whatever they wanted. In addition, though, Rome's brutal destruction of Carthage led some Romans to fear that they had become too proud and arrogant for their own good, and they wondered if the same fate might one day await them. But finally, and most important for our next episode, the Punic Wars saw the start of a trend of the rise of famous, powerful individuals like Scipio Africanus and other Roman generals who helped to save Rome from destruction. As men like this began to grow more powerful and more famous, it sort of went against the whole idea of the Republic, which was to share power amongst as many rich people as possible and to stop one person from becoming too big for their boots. And so for the next century, Rome would see the rise of a whole series of powerful and ambitious leaders who would do more and more illegal and extreme things to gain success and popularity, whether for noble reasons or selfish ones. Which means that even though the Romans didn't know this yet, the Republic was basically headed for the political equivalent of a waterfall. But not like a Splash Mountain waterfall, more like one with sharp, pointy rocks at the bottom. And crocodiles. Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning into this series on ancient Rome. Feel free to share these with your friends and family if you're enjoying them. Your challenge for this week is to figure out how many elephants Hannibal actually did bring with him and how many of them survived the trip across the Alps. As always, stay tuned for our next episode. Have a great week and we will see you then.